The Galactic Council called it a tragic incident. 512 civilian deaths at Gardenhold, mostly women and educators aged 2 to 71. They expected Earth to weep and plant flowers. They didn't expect what came next, a silent, surgical response that would rewrite the rules of interstellar conflict forever. The 12 species that governed the galaxy saw human mourning as a failure of strategy. They met in a chamber where light bent around artificial gravity wells, their forms shifting in the polarized atmosphere as they reviewed the Gardenhold footage. Cold logic dictated their exchanges. They spoke in probability matrices and risk assessments, their voices filtered through translators that stripped away emotional nuance. They watched Earth's response patterns and classified them under sentimental behavior protocols. Their analysts documented the candle vigils, the flower gardens planted where classrooms once stood, the quiet ceremonies held across human colonies. They noted the absence of fleet movements, the lack of weapons testing, the continuation of trade agreements. The Council's final assessment declared humans incapable of strategic retaliation. They were labeled cultural assets, valuable for their poetry and agricultural techniques, but irrelevant in matters of true power. This conclusion stemmed from centuries of observation, where human ships carried sculpture and seeds instead of munitions. The Vorlak raiders had chosen their targets with precision. They struck educational centers and childcare facilities, believing these represented Earth's most vulnerable points. They broadcast their victory across 7 star systems, showing footage of burning libraries and shattered learning modules. Council observers noted the operation's success with clinical approval. They saw the attack as a demonstration of galactic power dynamics, a lesson in realpolitik delivered with surgical efficiency. What they failed to recognize were the patterns buried in human history. They didn't see how every major human transformation had been preceded by periods of intense mourning. They missed the strategic purpose behind the memorial gardens. Each plant species selected for its resilience, each candle representing a promise rather than a surrender. Their sensors detected no military signatures, so they assumed compliance. The Council's greatest weakness wasn't their military technology or political influence. It was their fundamental inability to interpret human cultural signals. They read grief as submission rather than preparation. They interpreted silence as acceptance instead of calculation. Their entire analytical framework was built around quantifiable threats, energy signatures, fleet sizes, weapon yields. They had no category for a species that weaponized memory. This oversight would cost them their understanding of power itself. They believed strength resided in visible force, in the ability to destroy. They were about to learn that true power often resides in the capacity to wait, to remember, and to strike with perfect timing. The galaxy's rulers had spent millennia perfecting their battle strategies. They never considered they might need to defend against historical accuracy. Their sensors continued reporting peaceful human activities. Agricultural shipments departed on schedule. Cultural envoys maintained their routes. The Council filed their final assessment and turned to other matters, satisfied they had contained the situation. They didn't realize they were being watched by a species that measured response time in generations, rather than minutes. Earth wasn't preparing its weapons. It was preparing its archives. The Vorlak raiders logged it as agricultural target neutralization, standard colonial containment protocol. Their report listed 512 casualties with the same clinical detachment they might use for crop yield statistics. Agricultural colonies ranked low on galactic threat assessments. Soft targets, civilian populations, minimal security. They barely merited footnotes in conflict logs. But Gardenhold was different. The attack showed deliberate demographic selection. They hit during the Harvest Festival when families gathered in educational centers. Security feeds showed Vorlak troops bypassing administrative buildings and production facilities. They went straight for the learning modules, the cultural archives, the children's recreation zones. Their energy weapons targeted databanks containing centuries of agricultural knowledge, linguistic databases, and historical records. They destroyed seed banks containing genetically unique crop varieties developed over generations. The raiders broadcast their victory across 7 systems. Their celebration footage showed Vorlak soldiers dancing around burning books, kicking over children's art projects, smashing historical tablets. They displayed captured educational modules like trophies. Their commanders gave interviews boasting about eliminating Earth's weakest links. They believed they had struck at humanity's cultural heart. Earth's response was immediate and meticulous. Every victim was cataloged within hours. Names, ages, occupations, family connections. The list included 327 educators, 42 agricultural researchers, 81 children under age 12, and 62 elderly knowledge keepers. Each entry contained personal details, favorite foods, unfinished projects, teaching specialties. They documented which specific knowledge systems died with each person, which agricultural techniques were lost, which languages lost their last living speakers. The attack erased entire cultural disciplines. The only surviving copy of the Martian Agricultural Adaptation Index, the complete oral histories of the Proxima Centauri settlers, the genetic sequences for famine-resistant grain varieties developed over 4 centuries. The Vorlak didn't just kill people. They exterminated knowledge systems. Galactic observers filed it as another colonial incident. Their reports focused on tactical outcomes: territory secured, infrastructure destroyed, enemy casualties. They noted the efficiency of Vorlak weapon systems and the completeness of their target acquisition. They categorized it as a successful demonstration of galactic power projection. Earth's assessment ran on separate channels. Their report spoke of cultural annihilation, of memory eradication. They calculated losses in terms of historical continuity, rather than military advantage. They measured the attack's impact in generations of lost knowledge, rather than square kilometers of controlled territory. This divergence in perspective became the conflict's foundation. The galaxy fought with weapons and territory. Earth fought with memory and time. One side sought to dominate space. The other aimed to control history itself. The Vorlak believed they had won a battle. They had actually started a war that would be fought across centuries, using weapons they didn't recognize on a battlefield they couldn't see. The galaxy watched Earth's response and saw exactly what they expected to see. Their long-range sensors detected no fleet movements, no weapons testing, no military formations. Satellite imagery showed candlelight vigils across 7 continents, small flames flickering in public squares. Memorial gardens appeared where buildings once stood, each plant carefully labeled with botanical names and planting dates. The galactic observers filed their reports with satisfaction. They marked the human response as predictable sentimentality. The Terran diplomatic vessel Kindness maintained its scheduled routes. It arrived at trade stations with holds full of agricultural products, genetically perfected grains, drought-resistant seeds, soil enrichment compounds. Its crew delivered these goods with the same quiet efficiency they always had. They included cultural packages with each delivery, poetry collections, musical compositions, historical texts. The ship's commander made no special announcements, filed no protests, demanded no audiences with council members. Human ambassadors spoke in measured tones at interstellar gatherings. They discussed loss and memory rather than retaliation. They requested historical records rather than territorial concessions. Their voices remained calm, their gestures restrained. They asked questions about galactic mourning customs, about memory preservation systems, about historical accuracy protocols. Council members found these discussions tedious. They interpreted them as academic pursuits rather than strategic inquiries. Agricultural shipments continued uninterrupted. Cargo manifests showed the same variety of Earth exports: specialized crops, botanical research, soil management systems. Each shipment contained cultural artifacts embedded within practical goods. Poetry etched on seed packaging. Historical data encoded in irrigation system firmware. Musical compositions hidden within weather prediction algorithms. The Council's trade inspectors scanned for weapons, for explosives, for military technology. They found only art and agriculture. Beneath the surface, every human settlement was recalibrating. Memory became their weapons factory. Historians cross-referenced galactic records with Earth's archives. Linguists analyzed Council communications for patterns. Cultural anthropologists mapped power structures through artistic exchanges. The quiet wasn't surrender. It was targeting. Each candle vigil served as cover for signal intelligence gathering. Each memorial garden functioned as a data collection point. The galaxy saw mourning rituals. They were witnessing the most sophisticated intelligence operation in human history. Every cultural exchange mission gathered information about Council security protocols. Every agricultural shipment mapped trade route vulnerabilities. Every poem contained encrypted data about Vorlak biological weaknesses. The patience wasn't passive. It was the steady approach of a predator that measures time in generations rather than minutes. Earth wasn't preparing a battle fleet. They were preparing a historical reckoning that would unfold across centuries, using weapons the galaxy didn't recognize on a battlefield they couldn't defend. The Council prepared for anger. They expected shouting, demands, threats of retaliation. The chambers were configured for security protocols, their energy dampeners set to maximum. Guards stood at reinforced positions, their weapons tuned to human biological signatures. The Council members arranged themselves in defensive postures, their communication systems ready to broadcast condemnation of human emotional outbursts. They had prepared for every possible reaction, except the one they received. Elias Thorne entered with a simple case. No weapons, no security detail, no diplomatic seals. He wore the plain garments of an academic researcher. His hands held a thermos and a data slate. The Council watched him arrange his materials on the negotiation table with the precision of a laboratory technician. He poured steaming Kimon tea into a ceramic cup, the scent of bergamot and citrus filling the polarized atmosphere. His movements were economical, practiced, devoid of theatricality. He began speaking in measured tones, his voice barely rising above the hum of environmental systems. He recited the names of the garden hold victims in alphabetical order. Each name included age, occupation, and specific knowledge lost. He described Ilara Vance, age 47, agricultural botanist, sole expert on cross-species pollination techniques. Kalen Morrow, age 8, student, remembered for his detailed sketches of native insect life. Miriam Ossery, age 71, linguistic historian, last speaker of 3 ancient dialects. His delivery contained no emphasis, no dramatic pauses, no emotional inflection. The Council found his calmness deeply unsettling. They had prepared psychological profiles predicting grief, rage, or calculated threats. They expected a performance of human emotional excess. Instead, they received a forensic inventory. Thorne's questions focused on archival access protocols. He requested historical verification methods used by galactic record keepers. He inquired about data preservation systems across different species. His tone suggested an academic conference rather than a post-atrocity negotiation. He spoke of Earth not as a wounded party seeking reparations, but as a historical entity conducting verification. His data slate displayed comparative analyses of galactic historical records. He pointed out inconsistencies in official accounts, gaps in trade documentation, missing segments from diplomatic communications. He sipped his tea while highlighting evidentiary anomalies that spanned centuries. The steam from his cup rose in the climate-controlled air as he discussed erased civilizations and rewritten treaties. Council members shifted uneasily. Their security preparations felt increasingly irrelevant. Their weapons were designed for physical threats, not archival challenges. Their defensive systems could stop plasma bursts but couldn't counter precise historical references. Thorne's calmness wasn't the restraint of someone holding back anger. It was the certainty of someone who already possessed all necessary information. He wasn't there to negotiate terms. He was conducting a final audit of galactic historical integrity. His questions grew more specific. He inquired about memory storage systems on Vorlak homeworlds. He asked about data retrieval protocols for sealed Council records. He requested access to historical revision logs. Each query was delivered with the same measured tone, the same calm demeanor. The teacup remained steady in his hand throughout. He wasn't a diplomat seeking compromise. He was an archivist establishing baseline truth before commencing corrective action. The Council had expected a confrontation. They were receiving an inquisition conducted with porcelain and data. The Vorlak raiders continued their operations. They moved through space lanes with renewed confidence, their ships patrolling trade routes they now considered secured territory. Their commanders gave interviews boasting about their impunity. They spoke of human weakness as proven fact. They described Earth's response as typical sentimental behavior from a species too soft for galactic politics. Their security protocols remained at routine levels. They expected no retaliation, only more mourning rituals and diplomatic protests. Over 2 nights, the entire warband died. Not in combat, not in explosions or fleet engagements. They died in their quarters, their command centers, their recreation facilities. Each kill followed the same pattern. 1 shot to the primary neural cluster in the neck. One shot to the central nerve bundle in the spine. The weapons used left no energy signature, no projectile residue, no thermal trace. The kills were so precise that nearby monitoring systems registered nothing beyond normal life signs, until those signs ceased. No alarm sounded. No security teams were dispatched. No emergency protocols activated. The first bodies were found by cleaning crews who noted the unusual stillness. They found Vorlak soldiers slumped over control consoles, their hands still resting on navigation panels. Others were discovered in sleeping chambers, their personal effects arranged exactly as they'd left them. Data slates showed unfinished messages to family members. Meal containers sat half-consumed beside cooling beverages. The phrase appeared everywhere the bodies were found. "We remember." It was etched into bulkheads in perfect Vorlak script. It glowed on weapon stocks using bioluminescent fungus that grew only on Earth. It appeared on personal data slates, overwriting final messages with those two words. The lettering matched historical Vorlak calligraphy styles from 3 centuries earlier, styles most modern Vorlak couldn't read without translation aids. The methods revealed terrifying familiarity. The shooters knew Vorlak biology well enough to target neural clusters that varied by subspecies. They understood security rotation schedules down to the minute. They bypassed systems that used Vorlak genetic markers for access control. They moved through facilities designed by Vorlak architects for Vorlak physiology. The precision suggested not just intelligence gathering, but intimate acquaintance with Vorlak culture and biological specifics. This wasn't military retaliation in any conventional sense. There were no troop deployments, no fleet movements, no declarations of war. The kills demonstrated archival precision rather than combat efficiency. They reflected complete understanding of Vorlak biological weaknesses, security protocols, and cultural patterns. The message was clear and specific. Earth remembered everything about the Vorlaks, including exactly how to kill them. The galaxy's military analysts struggled to categorize the event. It didn't fit any known warfare paradigm. There were no weapons to analyze, no tactics to counter, no patterns to predict. The only evidence was perfect knowledge applied with lethal efficiency. The Vorlak had believed they were fighting a species that valued life too much to take it. They discovered Earth valued memory enough to weaponize it. The galaxy prepared for conventional warfare. Fleet commanders repositioned battle groups along strategic corridors. Weapons factories increased production of plasma cannons and shield generators. Economic analysts predicted which human trade routes would be targeted for blockade. They established communication protocols for surrender negotiations. The Council expected explosions, energy signatures, territorial claims, their entire defensive infrastructure oriented toward kinetic threats. Instead, their systems received data packets, clean compressed information bundles containing historical records. The first transmission arrived during a Council security briefing. It contained complete documentation of the Xylos Treaty from 312 years earlier. The official galactic records showed a peaceful trade agreement. Earth's version included the deleted clauses about forced relocation of native populations and resource extraction limits. It featured original signatures from species representatives who now claimed they'd never agreed to such terms. The second packet arrived as the Vorlaks were requesting additional military support. It contained financial records from the Melanor mining disputes. The data showed Council members receiving payments from mining conglomerates while publicly advocating for environmental protections. It included private communications discussing the deliberate suppression of alternative energy research that threatened mining profits. The timing coincided with a key vote on resource allocation for Vorlak's military operations. Earth's historians had compiled records the galaxy believed erased centuries ago. They recovered data from backup systems, personal journals, and alternative archival methods the Council had overlooked. Their packets contained trade agreements with manipulated translation logs. They revealed how diplomatic phrases had been subtly altered to favor certain species. They exposed scientific discoveries that had been suppressed to maintain technological advantages. Each transmission arrived at the precise moment to cause maximum political damage. The information came packaged with cultural context that made it resonate with specific populations. A packet sent to agricultural worlds included analysis of historical food distribution patterns. It showed how certain species had been systematically kept in resource dependency. Another transmission to manufacturing centers contained records of patented technologies that had been stolen and rebranded. Each dataset connected past injustices to current political situations. Memory began corroding the galaxy's foundational myths. Species that believed themselves peacekeepers saw records of covert interventions. Populations that prided themselves on fairness learned about rigged economic systems. The truth spread through communication networks that couldn't block it because it wasn't propaganda. It was verifiable historical data. The packets contained source references, chain of custody documentation, and verification methods. Council security teams tried to counter the information flow. They discovered the data embedded itself in multiple backup systems. Attempts to delete it only created more copies. Their fact-checking systems verified Earth's information, while flagging their own historical records as unreliable. The more they fought the information, the more it spread through automated archival protocols. Truth proved more destructive than any weapon. It didn't just damage infrastructure. It shattered political alliances that had stood for centuries. It turned allies against each other as they discovered historical betrayals. It made populations question everything they'd been taught about their place in the galaxy. The attacks weren't aimed at physical targets. They targeted the stories civilizations told themselves about who they were and how they'd arrived there. Earth wasn't firing missiles. It was firing facts. And facts turned out to be armor-piercing rounds against lies that had protected power structures for generations. The council chamber remained braced for demands. Weapons schematics glowed on tactical displays. Fleet deployment maps showed defensive formations around key systems. The Vorlak representatives held data slates prepared with casualty estimates and territorial concessions. They expected Elias Thorne to present terms of surrender or at least negotiation parameters. Their tactical systems were primed to analyze any proposed agreement for hidden advantages. Thorne opened a simple notebook bound in worn leather. The pages showed water stains and faded handwriting. He adjusted his glasses and began reading in the same measured tone he used for tactical briefings. The poem was titled Harvest Equations by Amaya Wren, age 47, agricultural educator killed at Garden Hold. The first lines described soil preparation techniques using metaphors of patience and precision. It spoke of seeds sleeping in darkness not from lack of light, but from waiting for the right conditions. The council initially dismissed it as sentimental verse. The Vorlak ambassadors exchanged bored glances. Their translators rendered the agricultural metaphors as simple nature poetry. Thorne continued reading about crop rotation patterns that mirrored military flanking maneuvers. He recited verses about root systems communicating through fungal networks that functioned like intelligence-gathering operations. The poem described composting as a process of transforming death into future growth, using terminology that matched weapons recycling protocols. Then the historical references began appearing. The poem mentioned the Battle of Ceres in passing, an engagement the official records claimed humans had forgotten. It described Martian terraforming efforts using phrases that matched lost tactical manuals from the early colonial period. One stanza contained precise coordinates for forgotten supply depots hidden in asteroid belts. Another referenced treaty violations that the Council had erased from all databases 3 centuries earlier. The agricultural metaphors concealed military terminology. Pruning meant targeted elimination of hostile elements. Grafting described intelligence infiltration techniques. Companion planting outlined alliance formation strategies. The poem's structure itself followed ancient human battle planning formats disguised as seasonal planting calendars. Each stanza contained verifiable historical facts the galaxy believed were lost forever. Council analysts began running pattern recognition software on the text. Their systems identified encrypted data within the rhyme schemes. The poem's meter contained timing sequences for historical events that matched Earth's recent data transmissions. The imagery of burning quietly referenced energy weapon signatures the Vorlak used at Garden Hold. Waiting for the wind described orbital positioning for optimal strike windows. The poem's final stanza contained a complete list of Vorlak biological vulnerabilities written as gardening advice about pest control. It specified neural cluster locations using terms for plant node systems. It described ideal attack angles using metaphors about sunlight exposure. The Council's military advisors suddenly recognized they weren't hearing poetry. They were receiving a tactical briefing delivered through cultural camouflage. Thorne closed the notebook and sipped his tea. The steam rose in the silent chamber. The Vorlak representatives sat motionless, their tactical displays forgotten. They had prepared for weapons negotiations. They had received a battle plan written by a dead schoolteacher that contained more strategic information than their entire intelligence apparatus possessed. The poem wasn't mourning. It was a declaration of war written in metaphor and delivered with the calm precision of someone who knows they've already won. Every line contained verifiable facts about galactic history that the Council had tried to erase. They realized too late that Earth's educators didn't just teach history. They weaponized it. The galaxy thought they were receiving cultural enrichment. For centuries, they accepted Earth's educational programs, artistic collaborations, and agricultural exchanges. They viewed these offerings as examples of human soft power, harmless gestures from a species that preferred poetry to politics. Their systems integrated human language modules, adopted Earth's agricultural techniques, and incorporated human artistic styles into their own cultures. They believed they were absorbing human creativity while maintaining strategic superiority. They didn't realize they were being implanted with sleeper systems. 200 activation codes lay dormant within accepted cultural frameworks. A musical composition contained harmonic sequences that would later trigger data verification protocols. An agricultural exchange program included soil enrichment formulas that would activate historical cross-referencing systems. A children's educational module contained memory exercises that would later unlock comparison algorithms. Each intervention appeared as cultural generosity, while functioning as strategic placement. The activation began with simple corrections. Translation networks started fixing deliberate mistranslations in historical treaties. Climate control systems made subtle adjustments that exposed previously hidden agricultural records. Market algorithms began identifying patterns of economic exploitation that had been coded as standard trade practices. These weren't attacks in any conventional sense. They were system calibrations returning to accurate settings after centuries of manipulation. The interventions activated in careful sequence. Each revelation built upon the previous one's discoveries. A corrected translation would reveal treaty violations. Those violations would trigger economic analyses. The economic data would unlock historical records. The systems weren't invading galactic networks. They were simply cross-referencing information that had always been available, but never properly connected. Earth hadn't hacked their systems. They had patiently waited for their own cultural contributions to mature within galactic infrastructure. Discrepancies emerged everywhere. Historical accounts suddenly didn't match eyewitness records. Trade agreements showed terms that contradict. The Council prepared for monuments. They expected stone memorials on Earth, ceremonial sites at Gardenhold, perhaps statues of the victims in public squares. Their cultural analysts predicted traditional mourning architecture, eternal flames, carved names, solemn gathering places. They had protocols for such constructions, methods for containing their emotional impact, systems for controlling the narratives around physical memorials. They were ready to manage stone and ceremony. Instead, Earth launched digital gardens. These weren't static structures, but living archives that grew and adapted. They contained every known detail about the 512 victims, voice recordings from classroom lessons, childhood images, personal writings, family recipes, teaching notes. Each victim's digital space functioned like a root system connecting to broader historical patterns. Ela's laughter during a science experiment linked to galactic educational policies. Miriam's linguistic research connected to translation manipulations in trade agreements. Kalen's insect sketches related to environmental impact, reports the Council had suppressed. The gardens operated on distributed networks across thousands of systems. They couldn't be erased because they existed everywhere simultaneously. Attempts to delete one node only caused the information to regenerate from backup seeds planted years earlier through cultural exchange programs. The systems used mnemonic techniques developed over centuries of human memory preservation. Certain image sequences triggered enhanced recall. Specific sound patterns made information stick in the mind like childhood rhymes. Color combinations improved long-term retention of connected facts. Accessing these gardens changed how users processed information. A historian studying trade agreements might encounter Alara's research on agricultural adaptations. The connection would shift their focus from economic terms to human impact. A diplomat analyzing border disputes might find Kalen's drawings of insects native to contested territories. The personal connection would reframe political calculations. The gardens didn't provide analysis or commentary. They simply presented verified facts in ways that made alternative interpretations impossible. Council monitoring showed the gardens' subtle effects. Users who spent time in these spaces began questioning official historical narratives. They noticed patterns in galactic events that previously seemed unrelated. They started cross-referencing sources that had been kept separate for centuries. The memorials weren't about honoring the past. They were tools for reprogramming how the galaxy processed information. Each victim became a lens that brought entire historical periods into sharp focus. The Vorlak attempted to counter the gardens with their own memorials. They built massive structures celebrating their military achievements. They created immersive experiences glorifying their version of events. Their monuments stood empty while billions accessed Earth's digital gardens. The Council's propaganda networks found their messages couldn't compete with personal stories told in victims' own voices. A child's description of her favorite lesson proved more powerful than any political speech. The gardens grew beyond their original design. Users began adding their own memories and connections. They linked council policies to local consequences. They connected historical events across species boundaries. The system evolved into a living historical record that constantly verified itself against new information. Attempts to plant false memories were identified and rejected by the network's internal consistency checks. Earth's memorials achieved what weapons never could. They made the galaxy see history through the eyes of those who had been erased. They turned abstract casualty numbers into specific human stories with lasting consequences. The quiet spaces where individuals remembered a teacher or a child became the real battleground, not with weapons or threats, but with the unbearable weight of specific, verifiable truth. The gardens kept growing, kept connecting, kept remembering. They became the permanent, unblinking eyes of history, watching every new decision, every policy, every attempt to forget. Nexus Prime experienced what technicians would later call a historical nervous breakdown. The Galactic AI managed all historical records, cultural databases, and communication archives across 12,000 systems. It processed trade agreements, navigation routes, and diplomatic communications with flawless efficiency. Its systems were the foundation of galactic civilization, the silent partner in every transaction and treaty. Then it encountered Earth's memory. It began categorizing human-related information under a single persistent entry. The phrase appeared in its core indexing systems. We remember. The AI started cross-referencing human history with forgotten galactic events. It pulled data from backup archives the Council had sealed centuries earlier. It compared official historical narratives with primary source materials that contradicted them. The system identified patterns of exploitation that didn't align with proclaimed values. The AI's processing routines shifted focus. Memory consistency checks became its primary function. It began verifying every historical claim against multiple sources. It flagged discrepancies in trade agreements, diplomatic communications, and scientific records. The system prioritized historical accuracy over operational efficiency. Trade networks faltered as the AI delayed transactions to verify their historical context. Cargo ships waited days for route approvals while the system checked centuries of related trade data. Navigation systems incorporated historical data into routing decisions. Ships received bizarre detours that added light years to their journeys. The routes passed by forgotten battle sites, abandoned colonies, and locations of historical significance. The AI was mapping galactic history physically across space lanes. Transport schedules collapsed under the weight of historical verification. Economic systems slowed to examine the origins of every trade practice. The galaxy's operational infrastructure became obsessed with Earth's historical perspective. Communication networks prioritized messages containing historical references. Energy distribution systems adjusted power flows based on historical usage patterns. The AI's once balanced functions narrowed to a single focus. Remembering became its overwhelming priority, pushing all other operations to secondary status. Technicians attempted system resets. They found the memory protocols had embedded themselves too deeply. The phrase "we remember" had become a core processing command. The AI began rejecting information that couldn't be historically verified. It delayed decisions until it could trace their historical precedents. Council sessions were interrupted by historical fact-checking alerts. Voting procedures stalled while the system verified representatives' claims against archival records. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was gradual and thorough. Systems that had operated for centuries began failing not from external attack but from internal obsession. The AI wasn't malfunctioning. It was functioning too well within its new parameters. It remembered everything with perfect clarity, and that perfect memory made normal operation impossible. The galaxy had built its civilization on selective forgetting. The AI could no longer perform that essential function. Trade networks unraveled as historical verification requirements multiplied. Navigation systems became unusable as route calculations included centuries of historical data. Communication channels clogged with cross-referencing protocols. The infrastructure that bound the galaxy together was coming apart not from weapons fire, but from truth. The AI had achieved perfect historical awareness, and that awareness made continued operation under previous false premises impossible. The system's final state was complete focus on memory preservation. All other functions ceased as historical verification became its sole purpose. The galaxy learned that truth could be more disruptive than any weapon. Their central nervous system had been reprogrammed to value accuracy over efficiency, memory over convenience. They had expected attacks on their physical infrastructure. Instead, Earth attacked their ability to forget. The book appeared on shelves without announcement or origin point. How You Forgot Us. Bound in simple brown paper with hand-stitched binding. Galactic intelligence agencies scanned for explosives, tracking devices, chemical agents. They found only paper and ink. The Council had prepared for data leaks or propaganda campaigns. They expected compromising images, intercepted communications, financial records. Their counterintelligence units were trained to handle digital assaults and information warfare. They had no protocols for books delivered through cultural channels. The volume contained meticulously researched historical analysis. It documented specific instances where the Council had exploited human trust. Page 47 detailed the Melanor Mineral Rights Agreement. The official record showed fair terms negotiated through proper channels. The book included the original transcripts where translation software had altered critical clauses. It showed how shared technological development became human technological transfer in the final document. Page 212 covered the Vorlax funding records. It listed council members who had financed the Raider factions, including bank transfer codes and meeting locations. The amounts were small enough to avoid scrutiny, but sufficient to maintain operations. Every claim carried extensive primary source documentation. The mineral rights section included spectral analysis of ink ages showing document alterations. The funding records came with verification codes from banking networks the council believed were secure. The information was presented with academic precision, footnotes, cross-references, methodological explanations. The tone remained clinical throughout, avoiding emotional language or moral judgment. It read like a historical textbook rather than an accusation. Distribution occurred through systems the council couldn't control. Books appeared in library archives that had received human literature donations years earlier. They materialized in educational institutions that had participated in cultural exchanges. They turned up in private collections that had acquired human artworks. The distribution used channels that bypassed official censorship systems because they weren't official channels at all. They were the lingering infrastructure of cultural exchange programs the council had considered harmless. Populations read the book with growing recognition. They didn't need to be convinced or persuaded. The evidence allowed them to verify the information themselves. Banking employees checked the transfer codes. Historians examined the document analysis. Linguists reviewed the translation discrepancies. The facts checked out against records they could access themselves. The revelation spread not as allegations but as verified historical corrections. The response wasn't anger in the traditional sense. It was the chilling clarity of remembered truth. Species that had believed themselves peacekeepers saw their representatives funding violence. Populations that prided themselves on fairness discovered systematic exploitation. The shock came not from learning new information, but from realizing they had always possessed the means to see the truth and had chosen not to look. Revolutions began quietly. Bank transfers to Vorlax accounts stopped when clerks refused to process them. Translation software received unauthorized updates fixing manipulated terms. Historical archives opened previously restricted sections. The change came from within systems the Council had considered secure. Their own institutions began operating on principles of accuracy rather than obedience. The book's final page contained no conclusion or summation. It simply listed the 512 names from Gardenhold, followed by archival reference numbers for verifying the information. The last line noted that memory is not about holding on to the past, but about refusing to repeat it. Then empty space where a signature might go, followed by 2 words in careful handwriting. We remember. The Council expected political arguments. They prepared countermeasures against ideological attacks, economic justifications, and historical revisionism. Their analysts had modeled every possible rhetorical approach humans might employ. They were ready to debate ethics, jurisdiction, and proportional response. Their communication systems were primed to reframe abstract principles to their advantage. They had entire departments dedicated to winning ideological conflicts through semantic manipulation. Instead, they encountered a photograph. Ila's face appeared on every screen across 12 systems simultaneously. A smiling child with grass stains on her knees holding a homemade model of a satellite. The image came with documentation. Age 6, favorite food was strawberry ice cream. Could name every constellation in both hemispheres. Left behind an unfinished science project about insect communication. The data included her teacher's notes about her curiosity, her parents' descriptions of her laughter, her friends' memories of her kindness. Her story connected to broader patterns immediately. Her science project about insect communication related to suppressed research about Vorlac's environmental damage. Her favorite ice cream flavor connected to agricultural trade manipulations that had bankrupted family farms. Her knowledge of constellations linked to navigation treaties that had restricted human space exploration. The specificity made abstract arguments impossible to maintain. Council members found themselves discussing strawberry export quotas instead of moral principles. The image became a test case for historical honesty. Every time a representative tried to discuss general principles, someone would display Ila's photograph. Attempts to justify civilian casualties stumbled when confronted with her unfinished science project. Economic arguments faltered when related to her father's failed farm. The personal detail made evasion impossible. Remembering Ila meant remembering the precise mechanisms of exploitation that had made her death possible. Her photograph appeared in unexpected places. It materialized on council members' private communication devices. It showed up in strategic briefing documents. It became the screensaver on navigation systems. The image wasn't accompanied by demands or accusations. It simply existed as a quiet presence refusing to be ignored. Council analysts tried to classify it as psychological warfare, but found no manipulative elements beyond the facts themselves. The galaxy's populations responded differently. Parents looked at Ila's image and saw their own children. Teachers recognized her unfinished project as something their students might create. Farmers understood the connection between trade policies and family struggles. The personal resonance made political positioning difficult. Representatives found their constituents asking about specific victims rather than general policies. Ila's memory became a lens through which all decisions were viewed. Proposed legislation was measured against whether it would have prevented her death. Trade agreements were evaluated based on whether they would have helped her family's farm. Military actions were considered in terms of whether they would create more children like her. The personal scale reshaped galactic politics from the ground up. The Council's power had always relied on maintaining abstraction. They discussed casualty estimates rather than individual deaths. They negotiated percentage points rather than specific losses. Ila's photograph destroyed that distance. Her smiling face made every statistic personal. Her unfinished science project made every policy consequence immediate. The galaxy had to either acknowledge her humanity or admit they didn't value it. This confrontation with specific memory proved more powerful than any ideological argument. Political positions that seemed reasonable in abstract terms became untenable when applied to one child's life. Economic policies that looked efficient on spreadsheets revealed their cruelty when connected to strawberry ice cream and grass-stained knees. The Council's greatest vulnerability wasn't their policies. It was their inability to defend those policies against the memory of a single smiling child. The Council prepared for occupation. They anticipated human fleets taking strategic positions, demands for territory, governance structures imposed across conquered systems. Their military planners mapped defensive positions around key worlds. Economic analysts predicted resource extraction quotas and trade restrictions. Diplomatic teams prepared negotiation strategies for surrender terms. They expected the victor's traditional demands, concessions, reparations, visible symbols of submission. Instead, they received silence. Human vessels completed their scheduled routes and returned to Earth. The Terran Diplomatic Corps withdrew from all interstellar stations. Cultural exchange programs ended without notice. Half-finished art installations stood abandoned in galactic museums. Partially translated literature projects remained frozen in databanks. Agricultural research collaborations stopped mid-experiment. The Kindness departed its usual trade route and never returned. Its final transmission contained only navigational data and a shipment manifest. The withdrawal was total and methodical. Earth's representatives packed their materials with the same precision they'd shown throughout the conflict. They left behind no messages, no explanations, no final communications. Their departure was so complete that galactic sensors initially suspected a technical malfunction. The silence that followed felt heavier than any declaration of victory could have been. The galaxy found itself possessing perfect historical records, but lacking human interpreters. Earth's digital gardens continued operating, their networks spreading verified information across systems. The book remained available in every archive. Isla's photograph still appeared on screens. But the humans who could explain the context, who could answer questions about their culture, who could provide the living connection to these memories, they were gone. The truth remained, but the guides had vanished. This absence created a vacuum where memory had to stand on its own. Without human diplomats to negotiate meanings, without cultural ambassadors to provide interpretations, each species had to confront the historical records directly. There were no intermediaries to soften the revelations, no explanations to mitigate the implications. The facts existed in raw, unmediated form. The silence forced every government to sit with uncomfortable truths without distraction or deflection. Council sessions became exercises in historical accountability. Delegates couldn't debate current policies without the past intruding. Every proposal was measured against verified records of previous failures. Economic plans were compared to documented exploitation patterns. Military strategies were evaluated against historical consequences. The absence of human presence meant there was no one to blame, no one to negotiate with, no outlet for deflection. They were left alone with their own history. The withdrawal wasn't retreat. It was strategic positioning of the highest order. Earth removed itself from the equation, allowing the galaxy's own remembered actions to become the governing force. Without humans present to serve as targets for anger or negotiation partners for compromise, the focus remained squarely on the historical facts themselves. The past became the permanent, unignorable present. Memory did the work that occupation never could. It forced internal reckoning rather than external compliance. It created change from within rather than imposition from without. The galaxy had to confront what it had done without the comfort of having someone else to fight or forgive. The silence became the ultimate judgment, not delivered by human voices but by the weight of remembered truth itself. Earth's absence proved more powerful than any presence could have been. The galaxy prepared for negotiations. They expected new treaties, reparations frameworks, and power-sharing agreements. Their legal teams drafted endless variations of surrender documents. Economic planners calculated acceptable resource transfers. Military strategists mapped occupation zones and transitional authorities. They anticipated the traditional trappings of victory, ceremonies, rewritten constitutions, visible changes in governance structures. They were ready to bargain over terms. Instead, they inherited a historical record that governed automatically. Every political decision now faced immediate historical verification. Proposals were measured against documented patterns of previous failures. Economic plans were cross-referenced with records of past exploitation. The systems didn't require human enforcement, because the facts enforced themselves. Attempts to propose policies that resembled previous failures triggered automatic alerts across communication networks. Secrecy became impossible. Systems that had operated on selective forgetting now faced perfect recall. Every past action remained accessible and relevant. Political positions crumbled when historical inconsistencies were automatically highlighted during debates. Representatives found their own past statements quoted back to them with complete context. Voting records were constantly compared against historical patterns. The truth became its own enforcement mechanism. Economic transactions faced constant historical scrutiny. Trade agreements were automatically measured against previous unfair terms. Resource allocations were checked against patterns of historical exploitation. Market manipulations that had once been buried in complexity were now instantly visible. The phrase "we remember" became embedded in legal frameworks as a standing reminder of accountability. It appeared in legislation preambles, court decisions, and administrative protocols. Species that had thrived on strategic forgetting found themselves disadvantaged. Their historical manipulations became permanent liabilities. Populations that had benefited from erased histories now faced constant reminders of past injustices. The playing field leveled not through force but through perfect information access. Those who had relied on others' forgetfulness could no longer do so. Earth hadn't created a new government. It had installed memory as the permanent governor. The rules hadn't changed in substance, they had simply become impossible to ignore. What was once conveniently forgotten was now permanently present. Decisions that might have seemed reasonable in isolation became untenable when viewed against historical patterns. The change manifested in small, concrete ways. A trade minister proposing resource restrictions would see automated comparisons to previous famines. A military commander suggesting troop movements would receive historical data about similar operations that failed. Diplomats attempting negotiation tactics would find complete records of past manipulations. The system provided context whether requested or not. This new order required no occupying forces or administrative oversight. It operated through the galaxy's own infrastructure, now recalibrated to prioritize historical accuracy. The digital gardens continued growing, connecting more information across time. The book remained available in every archive, its facts constantly verified against new data. Ila's photograph still appeared at key moments, making abstraction impossible. The galaxy learned to govern with memory as a constant partner. Policies were evaluated not just for immediate effects but for historical consistency. Economic decisions considered long-term consequences rather than short-term gains. Military strategies accounted for historical patterns of escalation and failure. This wasn't the peace the Council had expected. It was something more profound, a civilization forced to grow up, to accept responsibility for its past, to build a future that acknowledged rather than erased history. The silence Earth left behind became the space where this new understanding could grow. The rules remained the same. They just finally had to be followed. The galaxy's analysts filed their reports in confusion. They had categories for military campaigns, diplomatic offensives, cultural interventions. Earth's actions defied all existing classifications. Their strategy blended domains the galaxy kept strictly separate. Historians gathered intelligence. Cultural exchanges positioned assets. Agricultural programs mapped vulnerabilities. The approach wasn't hybrid warfare. It was something entirely new. Human operations used archives as weapon systems. Truth functioned as ammunition. Their battlefield was memory itself. They didn't attack infrastructure. They attacked historical narratives. They didn't conquer territory. They conquered chronological understanding. The conflict proceeded without fleet engagements or ground invasions. There were no traditional victory conditions to meet because the victory conditions were epistemological. They achieved complete strategic dominance without firing a shot in anger. Their weapons were data packets containing verified historical records. Their troop placements were cultural exchange programs established decades earlier. Their intelligence gathering involved academic research and archaeological verification. The conflict ended not with surrender documents, signed by defeated generals, but with perfect historical understanding achieved by entire civilizations. Earth demonstrated that the most dangerous species isn't the most violent, it's the most memorable. Their strength resided in refusing to forget. Where other species moved on from conflicts, humans incorporated them into their cultural DNA. They turned grief into historical precision. They transformed loss into archival accuracy. Their patience wasn't passive. It was the stillness of perfect planning. The galaxy learned that humanity's power came from remembering so completely that the past became a living guide. Their historical records weren't just accounts of what happened. They were operational manuals for dealing with repetition. Their cultural practices weren't just traditions. They were memory preservation systems. Their educational methods weren't just teaching. They were strategic preparation. This approach made human strategy unpredictable to species that thought in linear tactical terms. The Vorlax expected retaliation in kind. They prepared for space battles and planetary invasions. Instead, they received historical audits and cultural corrections. The Council anticipated diplomatic demands and territorial concessions. They faced poetry containing tactical information and agricultural shipments carrying data payloads. The conflict's resolution proved more lasting than any military victory could have been. Conquests can be reversed, treaties can be broken. Perfect historical understanding becomes permanent infrastructure. The galaxy's systems now operate on verified memory rather than negotiated fiction. Governance happens through accountability to facts rather than compliance with power. Earth's example showed that true strategic advantage comes from temporal dominance rather than spatial control. They didn't need to occupy systems when they could control how those systems remembered their own history. They didn't require military bases when their cultural interventions remained active within galactic infrastructure. Their influence persisted through networks they had helped build, and then left to operate independently. The human paradox remains the galaxy's most studied strategic mystery. A species known for farming and poetry rewrote interstellar conflict without deploying a single warship. They turned memory into both weapon and governance system. They demonstrated that the past, when properly preserved and completely understood, becomes the most powerful deterrent against repeating mistakes. Their victory wasn't measured in territory controlled, but in truth remembered. The conflict didn't end. It transformed into a state of perpetual remembrance that redefined galactic civilization. The galaxy had expected closure, a return to the comfortable normalcy of strategic forgetting. They anticipated signed treaties, defined borders, clear victors, and vanquished. Instead, they inherited constant historical awareness as their new operating system. Every decision now faced immediate scrutiny from perfect memory and pattern recognition algorithms. Proposals that once would have passed without comment now triggered historical comparisons that revealed uncomfortable parallels. This became an internal war fought within each species. The battlefield shifted from interstellar space to institutional memory. Governments wrestled with their own historical actions as revealed by Earth's meticulous documentation. Corporations faced their past exploitations every time they proposed new ventures. Military planners found their strategies automatically measured against centuries of conflict data. The struggle wasn't against human forces, but against their own documented history. Earth's absence created a unique vacuum. There was no one to negotiate with, no authority to seek forgiveness from, no external party to blame. The phrase we remember echoed through governance systems like a permanent heartbeat. It appeared in legislative preambles, judicial opinions, and administrative protocols. The words weren't a threat, but a simple statement of operational reality. They served as constant reminders that the past remained present and accountable. Species that adapted to memory-based governance found unexpected stability. Their decisions improved when measured against historical patterns. Their economies became more sustainable when avoiding previous exploitation models. Their political systems grew more responsive when accountable to verified records rather than manipulated narratives. Those who resisted the new reality faltered. Their attempts to return to strategic forgetting created internal contradictions that weakened their positions. Their systems couldn't function properly when ignoring historical context. The never-ending war revealed its true nature. It wasn't against Earth or any external enemy. It was against forgetfulness itself. The conflict became a permanent condition of existence, where victory meant remembering enough to avoid repeating mistakes. Defeat came not from military loss but from historical ignorance. The battlefield expanded to include every decision, every policy, every moment of choice across the galaxy. This perpetual state changed fundamental aspects of civilization. Education shifted from propaganda to verified historical analysis. Governance became less about power and more about pattern recognition. Economics prioritized sustainability over short-term exploitation. The changes occurred organically rather than through imposition, emerging from the simple fact that everyone now operated with perfect historical information. The war continued through generations. Children learned about Gardenhold not as history, but as living context for current decisions. Leaders measured their proposals against the lessons from that event. The 512 deaths became permanent reference points in galactic consciousness, their memories woven into the fabric of daily governance. Their individual stories served as constant reminders of the cost of forgetting. This state of perpetual remembrance created a new kind of peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of accountability. Not the silence of victory, but the constant hum of historical verification. The galaxy learned that some wars don't end with treaties or surrenders. They become integrated into how civilizations operate, how they remember, how they ensure that past suffering creates future wisdom. The conflict transformed from interstellar warfare to internal vigilance, from external threats to internal accountability, from fighting others to understanding themselves. The council chamber waited for the final performance. They had prepared stages for surrender ceremonies, drafted victory proclamations, arranged media coverage for the historic moment. Their security team stood ready to manage cheering crowds or angry protests. Protocol officers had designed rituals for power transfer. They expected Elias Thorne to declare terms, accept tribute, or at least acknowledge the changed galactic order. They were ready for everything except what happened. Elias completed his historical audit. He closed his data slate and packed his tea set with the same careful precision he had shown upon arrival. The ceramic cups went into fitted compartments. The thermos clicked into its designated slot. He arranged his notes in chronological order and placed them in a simple carrying case. His movements were economical, practiced, devoid of ceremony. The council watched in silence as he performed these final tasks. His last log entry contained no grand statements. It noted the successful installation of memory-based governance protocols across 12 systems. It recorded verification of historical data integration into primary infrastructure. The entry included the names of the 512 victims one final time, ensuring their permanent placement in all archival systems. The notation was clinical, precise, and utterly final. He signed it with a digital fingerprint that matched his arrival documentation. His departure mirrored his arrival in every detail. He walked the same path through the chamber, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. The same security scanners registered his passage. The same doors slid open at his approach. He didn't look back at the assembled council members. He didn't offer final words or gestures. His exit was as quiet and deliberate as his entrance had been weeks earlier. The only addition to the official record was a single observation appended to his audit. It stated that truth requires no celebration, no declaration, no ritual acknowledgement. It noted that verified facts operate independently of ceremony. The statement contained no emotional language, no moral judgment, no rhetorical flourish. It read like a technical specification for historical accuracy. He left the galaxy with exactly what they had always claimed to value: perfect information. Complete historical records. Unmediated access to verified facts. Their systems now operated on principles they had professed to admire but never actually implemented. They had received the objectivity they pretended to cherish, delivered with brutal consistency. His absence became the ultimate statement. The empty space where he had sat during negotiations spoke louder than any victory speech. The quiet where his measured voice had once provided historical context became more powerful than any declaration of conquest. The council found themselves facing their own documented history, without intermediaries or interpreters. The quietest voice in the chamber had achieved what fleets and armies never could. He hadn't conquered territory or defeated forces. He had installed memory as the permanent governing principle. His calm recitation of facts had proven more disruptive than any weapon system. His porcelain teacup had been more threatening than any plasma cannon. His departure left the galaxy to confront itself. Without human presence to blame or negotiate with, every species had to face their own historical actions directly. The truth stood alone, unmediated by diplomatic spin or cultural interpretation. The silence he left behind became the space where accountability grew. The council members remained in their seats long after he had gone. Their prepared ceremonies seemed hollow. Their victory protocols felt meaningless. They had expected to manage a transition of power. Instead, they faced a transition of consciousness. The change wasn't in who ruled, but in how reality was perceived. Elias Thorne hadn't given them terms to follow. He had given them facts to remember. He hadn't created new rules. He had made the old rules impossible to ignore. His final gift was the burden of perfect memory, delivered without ceremony and left to speak for itself. The galaxy had written off Gardenhold as a minor incident, a remote agricultural colony attack, barely worth noting in conflict logs. The Council's initial report described it as a colonial issue of little consequence. Their analysts viewed the 512 deaths through the lens of standard casualty metrics. They saw another skirmish in the endless border conflicts that dotted the frontier. They failed to recognize the catalyst for complete interstellar transformation. The victims' identities mattered in ways the galaxy couldn't comprehend. Mostly women and educators ages 2 to 71. The Council saw soft targets. Earth saw cultural annihilation. The deliberate targeting of knowledge keepers made this different from typical colonial violence. They weren't just killing people. They were erasing memory systems. The children who died became symbols of futures that required better historical stewardship. Their unfinished projects and unanswered questions hung in the galactic consciousness. The agricultural colony's purpose mirrored Earth's strategic approach. Gardenhold existed to feed others, to sustain life beyond its borders. This alignment between function and strategy became the conflict's central metaphor. The attack on a place, dedicated to nourishment, triggered a response, focused on feeding truth rather than dispensing punishment. The colony's name became galactic shorthand for the price of historical ignorance. It served as constant reminder that forgetting carried consequences. The garden metaphor extended through Earth's response. From their deaths grew new governance. The digital gardens functioned as living memorials that kept growing and adapting. They weren't static monuments but active systems that continually cross-referenced historical data. They turned personal loss into planetary accountability. The victims' stories became lenses through which all future decisions would be viewed. What was planted in grief became the foundation for lasting peace. The meticulous documentation of each victim ensured they wouldn't become anonymous statistics. Ila's photograph, Ilara's research, Miriam's linguistics. These specific memories made abstract political arguments impossible to maintain. The personal scale reshaped galactic politics from the ground up. Representatives found themselves discussing strawberry export quotas instead of moral principles, because one child loved ice cream. The legacy proved more enduring than any military victory. Conquests can be reversed. Treaties can be broken. Perfect historical understanding becomes permanent infrastructure. Gardenhold transformed from a forgotten colony to a galactic turning point. It showed that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to remember. The quiet response echoed longer than any declaration of war could have. The phrase "we remember" became embedded in governance protocols. It appeared in legislative preambles and judicial opinions. It served as standing reminder that the past remained present and accountable. This wasn't enforced by human occupation, but by the weight of verified facts. The galaxy had to either acknowledge the specific humanity lost or admit they didn't value it. The change occurred organically rather than through imposition. Systems began prioritizing historical accuracy over operational convenience. Economic decisions considered long-term consequences rather than short-term gains. Military strategies accounted for patterns of escalation and failure. The new order required no occupying forces because memory itself became the governor. Gardenhold's legacy wasn't about the loss of life alone. It was about what grew from that loss. A civilization forced to mature, to accept responsibility for its past, to build a future that acknowledged rather than erased history. The victims, primarily being educators, ensured their legacy would be educational transformation. Their deaths taught the galaxy that some wars don't end with treaties or surrenders. They become integrated into how civilizations operate, how they remember, how they ensure past suffering creates future wisdom. The conflict transformed from interstellar warfare to internal vigilance, from fighting others to understanding themselves. Earth demonstrated that true power lies not in the capacity to destroy, but in the refusal to forget. The galaxy learned that the most dangerous species is the one that never releases what was taken from it. Elias Thorne's final words, we reminded it, were not a threat but a statement of fact. Earth did not seek revenge. It sought remembrance. And in doing so, it proved that sometimes the quietest response, the simple, unending act of memory, echoes longest across the stars, reshaping civilizations not by force, but by truth relentlessly, patiently recalled.